Hey, Kristin, welcome to the Girl Techno Podcast. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm really interested in your story, the leap that you took, and also just I don't know if you're currently living on the road, but that whole concept, I'm so interested in that. So before we, jump into stuff, and like I said, you made some really bold moves, leaving your leadership role and not having a job lined up, and now living on the road. Can you give us the backstory in terms of what motivates you to take this type of leap? 'Cause those were many leaps you took.
At the same time, especially for somebody who, I like to say, I'm not like a leap taker by nature. My husband and I actually are both like planners, and I used to do events for a living. Like, I think through things, and I've never stayed in a hostel or traveled crazy places. So, I would say we'd have to go back. My husband and I dreamt up this idea to live on the road in 2016. We went on date night one night, and we were kind of having one of those like want out of our jobs days. And we were like, what if we just, instead of saving for this house, what if we just put all our stuff in our car and lived on the road and saw a bunch of cities in the US? And honestly, it just kind of stuck. Like, we talked about it every couple months for years. We would go on to buy a house. We had a baby in there, so it kind of felt like it was over. And then, like so many people, COVID happened, and we just started putting everything back on the table, saying, like, my husband works for himself. He works from home and could work from anywhere. And at the time, I had a very full-time in-office job. They were not open to remote at all, which is fine. It works for them. But when I got a taste of working remotely during COVID, I said, if we could do this, our son was 2 at the time, we could just leave and go on the road if I could work virtually. So, it snowballed really fast from there. We wanted to sell our home. The timing was perfect. We sold our house. I ended up quitting my very full-time job where I had worked my way up to leadership without a plan. I started my business that same week, and we left for the road 3 months later. We've been on the road full-time ever since. So we are at 2.5 years of living on the road.
Oh my God. That's such an amazing story. Let me ask you this. When you took that leap, was it scary for you? Well, let me just say this. So I remember during COVID, a lot of us got used to being at home working, and because we were able to get time back in our lives, right? Like hashtag reclaiming our time type thing. And we realized that one, jobs can be done from home. Why do we gotta be in office the whole time? But also we're there more for our family, for the kids, and it just worked better. So being with that during COVID, was it still scary for you to say, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave this job. I really don't have nothing lined up, but I'm going to just do it anyway. I'm going to take that real leap of faith. Was it a scary feeling? Because I always want to get into the mindset behind when we make those leaps. What are we thinking about when we do it?
Yeah, totally. Well, and like everybody else during COVID, I was especially scared because there was just so much uncertainty that year.
Yeah.
Actually, most of these leaps were in 2021. So we were through like the first big wave of like, will we have jobs? What's happening?
Yeah.
But it was still that fear. For me, I'll say this, I am a planner. For us, taking that leap was relying on 2 big things that made me feel a little bit better. We had paid off all our debt, which was a big goal of ours, and we had an emergency fund. And we would sit and like run numbers of like worst case scenario, like if I don't have work for 6 months, could we survive on my husband's income? And if we go on the road and the worst, like we kind of had to go to that worst case scenario and let ourselves be like, will we still be okay? And when we saw like, hey, we've got some money saved up, we could scale way back, we could live off my husband's income barely. And then it's like, why not? Like, when you go to that worst case place, and that's not the case for everybody. And frankly, looking back, I don't even know that I would recommend everybody just take the crazy leap. If I had to do it again, I would say start your side hustle, build up some clients, but the way it all came together, it's just the way it had to happen for us. And there was a lot of timing factors with selling our house and all that. So it ended up being kind of this crazy leap into the unknown. But I was definitely scared, to answer your original question. There were a lot of tears leading up to it. I cried a lot. And then the day I did it, I was like, this was right. I'm in it. I feel great. Like after it was over and I quit and we did it, I felt fantastic ever since. So all my fear was like before.
That's good, because you're right. It's a lot of emotions leading up to it. It really is. I always talk about how some people leaps are intentional, right? You're like, okay, I I knew I was going to do this, so this happens. But then there are unintentional leaps for a lot of people when people get laid off. And during COVID, a lot of people had to pivot in life and try to figure out how to make it because of that uncertainty. And so entrepreneurship was a natural thing for people to do, to start figuring out what's my passions, what I like, what I'm good at, what can I do, kind of thing. So let me ask you, to living on the road, is it more of a minimalist type of mindset, you would think? Because you think about, it's like, I don't know, is it like, what is your living story? Is it more like, hey, we have a trailer that we're kind of like driving in and we live in that? Or do we go to every city and find little places to kind of hop? What does it take to even do that type of lifestyle? And is it a minimalist type of lifestyle that you're living?
Yes, it totally is. There's been a lot of lessons for me. Like, I love clothes, being a girl's girl. I was just looking, thinking, oh, your nails and your lipstick look so good. And here I am. Like, I've had to give up a lot to be on the road. And there are those trade-offs. Like, I've got one suitcase full of clothes and I wear the same thing. And, there's some stuff like that. But tactically, so there's a lot of people who live in RVs. We don't. We live in Airbnbs, primarily short-term rentals. We need the space. My husband and I both work for ourselves, and we're traveling with our son, who is now 5. So like, we have to have a little bit of room. The RV life just wasn't going to work for our setup. So we stay in short-term rentals. We started in the US. We're actually currently in the UK. We just came over to Europe in October. But same kind of thing. We're in short-term rentals. The big difference here is we don't have a car. And that was kind of a safety net for me of being able to fit more stuff. And now it's all got to go in a few bags. So I've learned a lot of big lessons on reducing the stuff I need. I'll tell you, the key thing is I had to get off those email lists with all the clothing sales because I couldn't look at them because I knew I don't have space to buy anything. So I had to free my mind of it.
And while you're doing this, when did the idea for the business come about? When did you decide to say, hey, you know what? I have a certain skill set. I'm going to develop this virtual COO business and offer this service to founders and entrepreneurs. When did that come about for you?
So when I was thinking of leaving my job, I have always wanted, I've always worked with small business owners in my work, and I love it. My husband's a small business owner. I actually was raised by a very entrepreneurial parents. And so I had sort of toyed with the idea, but my plan was to go get a remote job that I could do from the road. I wasn't going to make that leap again all at once. And then the week I quit, one of my good friends said, hey, I know you're looking for a job, but I have a friend who needs some short-term COO services. Do you want to just take a contract while you're waiting? I said, fantastic. I'd love that, while I'm looking for a job. I went to that breakfast with her. We talked about what she needed in her business. And I called my husband on the way home and said, this is it. I'm doing it. I loved it so much, meeting with her. The idea of working with several clients at the same time was fun for me. And so I kind of went home on, buzzing, and my husband helped me come up with a name. And I said, I'm all in. So I made that leap the same week I left my job.
That's really awesome. Well, let our listeners know, first of all, what is a COO and what type of service do you offer to small businesses?
Yeah, so it's a good question. The COO role is a little undefined when it comes to a C-suite role. I always say it looks very different in a big corporation than it does in small business. In a big corporation, you might think of the COO often as the person who's being groomed to take over when the CEO retires or something like that. In a smaller company, a COO, I always look at it as the founder and CEO's business partner. You might have heard the phrase visionary integrator model, where there's a visionary CEO. They take the company to a certain level and they look up and go, hey, I may or may not have an amazing admin who's doing tasks. I may have a team, but I need that business partner who's helping me look at our goals, turn them into strategies, and then turn them into plans. So a COO really jumps in and becomes that partner with the CEO. The tasks can look different. There's a lot of things that are similar. A lot of times I do the strategic planning, and then I might either do or oversee project management, new initiatives, some HR oftentimes. My background's in events, so that usually falls on my plate. But a lot of what I'm doing for my clients is getting started on their initiatives that meet their goals and then handing them off to experts once they're rolling, on behalf of the vision, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah. Because you're right. A lot of time with founders and entrepreneurs, we're so focused on like big picture things. You know what I mean? Where it's so hard to get into strategy, the details of it. So to have someone like you come in and really kind of like, okay, here's your big picture, but now here's a map for you to get to that big picture, basically.
Exactly.
Right. It really does. It really does help and define the role. Like, so your journey in entrepreneurship, it seemed like you got your first client. Like so cool, because a lot of us are like, okay, I'm working really hard just to get one client, right? Sales is a big part of being an entrepreneur. And so it seemed like it was easy. So how has the journey been for you while living on the road? How has it been in terms of like, I know you can't meet with them in person. Everything has to be virtual because you're consistently moving every few years or so. So how has the journey been for you?
Well, I'm sure you've experienced this, Shaunie, and probably a lot of your guests and listeners too. It's been really up and down. Like I feel like small business and entrepreneurship is high highs and low lows. Like, I have had days where in the morning I'm telling my husband, like, what are we doing? Like, why am I doing this? This is insane. And by that night, I had signed a new client and I'm like, woohoo, we're toasting. Like, this is the best day ever. And that just feels like so many of the days. I felt really lucky that early on, I got several of my first clients just by word of mouth. Like early on, your friends and family are so key in helping you spread the word. And I had some really wonderful people who were willing to just say my name in front of other people, which is a huge help. As I've grown, that kind of runs out early on. And so, of course, I hope that my current clients are in a place where they're willing to share my information with their friends as well, because business owners often know other business owners. But I've really leaned into LinkedIn and, getting myself out there in other ways as I've continued on this journey and learned like where I want to go and what's next. But it's a roller coaster. If you're not up for a roller coaster, you might not want to consider it.
I know. Listen, just the other day, I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And telling my husband, you're right. It's full of high highs and low lows, because the other day I felt like I had an emotional breakdown where it's like you get, just that day of you like, you feel so overwhelmed. There's so much to do. There's so much going on. There's so much you want to do. Right. And you just feel like, I don't know what am I doing? I left this 6-figure job I had. I could have just stayed there and life would have been easy. When honestly, it's unpredictable, people get laid off. Things are, jobs are not predictable anymore. It's very unpredictable. But totally. It's so true in terms of like the journey and the highs and the lows of it, because you're going to go through some stuff and you got to be strong. I tell people entrepreneur's journey is not for the weak at heart. It really isn't. You got to be strong to do this.
It's true. Yeah. And there's these kind of like gurus who tell you like, if you follow these 5 steps, it's all going to be up and to the right. And like, I don't think that's true. I think that it is better for us to sit here and say, hey, I love it. I'm glad I did it. And there are days where I'm like, what am I doing? It's kind of both and so. Yeah.
So you said that your husband comes from an entrepreneurial family, so it was always in him. And I look at that as such, it's such a difference, because when you're born into a family of entrepreneurs, you have such a different mindset where your mindset is basically, I can do whatever. I could do anything I want to do. I don't need somebody's job to do it simply because I have parents. I saw them do it. This happens. But when you grow up in a setting where you see both your parents work hard at jobs and they retire, your mindset is, well, that's really what I see. That's how it is. So tell me about your background in terms of entrepreneurship. Did you ever see yourself as an entrepreneur? Was it something you saw growing up, or is it just something you say, you know what, I kind of just developed this, but I never really saw myself as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So my husband is an entrepreneur, but actually my parents were entrepreneurs, and I feel really, really lucky as somebody who's gone off on her own to have that. Like you were saying, like, I think growing up, my parents always saw things a little differently when it came to, anything is possible. And you want to start that business, you might as well. I mean, we were young and I was running little businesses in the neighborhood, just like hitting up all the neighbors. To buy stuff or, hire me to babysit or whatever it was, just because I had always seen that. And so I do think that impacts your mentality a lot, that I felt like, well, might as well try. And I think there are these kind of talking points that people get stuck on, like insurance. Health insurance is a big deal. And I do get that. And I think things like health insurance can stop people from going for what they really
Oh yeah.
want
Oh yeah.
instead of trying to get creative. And I mean, I do understand, like, if you have ongoing health issues or something where you have to have that insurance, it is a big deal, and that's a big thing to overcome. But my parents never let health insurance stand in the way of what they wanted to do with running a business. And so I just had that mentality, like, I don't know, I'll go online, I'll figure it out, I'll research, I'll get quotes, I'll get creative. And so that makes a big impact in just how you see entrepreneurship in general, I think.
Yeah. You know, you're so right. We definitely think about the health insurance, and I'm thankful that my husband, you know, is the person that works. So I'm on his insurance, but that is a big piece in terms of like why a lot of people will kind of shy away from, especially if they're single parents and they have children. So it's really difficult for them to make that decision. So they'll have to do the side hustle route, you know. Let's talk about balance, because as a mom, as a wife, even as a business owner, right? As a friend, sister, all that great stuff. How do you balance it all? Because I know it's hard, even for me, I know it's hard to balance everything. And I tell people I don't believe there is a such thing as balance. I think we just work through our days and do our best as we can, right? What does balance look like for you?
Totally. I mean, I agree with you. I think there are seasons is how I feel about it. Like there's a time and place to say I'm all in on this business thing. It is going to be a season of me working these crazy hours, you know, maybe being available less at home, but then the season should end, or it's no longer a season. Now you're just choosing to be that crazy and never have time for your family, or vice versa. Like there are seasons probably when, if you're a mom and your babies are little, where it's hard to really put in the extra time. You're just kind of surviving. I would say for me, a lot of it is being really clear on where my priorities are, even writing them down. Like when we left to travel, even though we're 2 years in, we're actually about to wrap up our time on the road this summer. I knew it was short term. When our son starts school, we'll be going back to the States and settling down. And so for my husband and I, we said, you know, travel and being with our family is our priority for these couple of years. I frankly turned down business over the past 2 years. And sometimes it's hard because I know had I been at home, I could have made more money. But I wouldn't have seen the world with my kiddo, you know, the way I have. And so when things get really crazy, I just remind myself, like, it's my family and travel. And of course, we need to work enough to get by and to grow our businesses. But when it comes down to it, I'm not here to do 60-hour weeks right now. That may come when my kid's back in school and I have that availability. You know, I may put some of those weeks in. But right now, if I did that, I would miss all this time on the road that we've invested in.
That's so good you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you about how do you manage your time, because you're doing this, like you say, you live on the road, you want to experience these new things with your family. So how do you balance it? So it's good to know where you're like, I'm not working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I have to, you know, like, do you do time blocking? And if so, do you have a certain time where you say, okay, at 3:00, 4:00, I'm finished for the day, no matter what? Whatever I didn't get done, I'm going to leave it for tomorrow, but I'm setting myself a schedule because I have to live a life and I have to experience this with my family.
Yeah, we have to. You know, when we left, our son was 2. So my husband and I split the days. That was one of the things when we left that we had to plan for. One of us works in the morning, like 7 a.m. till 1, for example. The other works 1 till 7. And when you're not working, you have the kiddo. And like you can get a little bit done with a kid around who's 2, 3, 4, but not a lot. Like they don't care about, you know, your work. They're like, okay, mom, wrap it up. We're going to the park. So it's kind of forced us to be very intentional with our days, like very intentional with our work schedule. There are days where after he goes to bed, we both go back to work. That's just reality. But our big goal when we came in was we said, we're going to do whatever we can during the weeks. Our weeks are going to be crazy. We're going to do this trade-off. Sometimes my husband and I like hardly see each other because we're trading off kid and work. But we are going to do everything we can to block our weekends so that while we're in our cities, we can go see everything. And we've done a pretty good job. And we've had a few exceptions to that, obviously, but we've done a really good job with that. And that's where we've done all of our adventuring and like skiing or exploring or hiking or whatever it is we're doing in the city we're in.
I think that's really cool. I really do. I wish I could take that mindset and just like, you know what, let's just sell the house and stay on the road. And my husband would probably be like, oh no, I'm not doing that. He's a corporate guy. So, you know, it's different. If he was more like entrepreneur, he's much so a corporate guy, and I feel like, okay, that's how we balance each other out. I'm more entrepreneur spirited. He's more of a corporate person. And so he'll be like, listen, I got to stay here for the job. You go live on the road for a while.
Yes. No, it's not for everybody. One of the things I do tell people when they're like, what you're saying, like, oh, I'm interested, but I could never sell the house. Like, you could look in the summer for a lot of Airbnbs will do a big discount on a 1 month rental. So if you could work from anywhere, you could do like a 1 month rental in the summer and get a big discount on it. Sometimes it's as cheap as going on a week or two vacation, honestly.
Yeah.
And kind of test it out. See if you like it. Some people are like, I could never do it. I would hate it. I need all my stuff. I'm like, I get that, you know.
I know. I would really have to adopt that minimalist lifestyle. It'll be difficult, but it'll be difficult for me, for sure. I love shoes too much. And if I can't bring them all with me, then I'm not going.
Oh, that was my hardest thing, was getting my shoes down. I mean, my husband and I talked about my shoes for weeks. He's like, I don't want to talk about your shoes anymore. I'm like, but do you think I'm going to need black boots and brown boots? He's like, I don't know. But
it's the important things. It's the little things that are important to us. So that's why we have to know. We definitely do.
Yes.
You know, I want to talk a little bit about your role in corporate America, just leadership. You know, a lot of times as female entrepreneurs, not female entrepreneurs, but female leaders, I was a leader in my organization as well. And the whole conversation, there's been a big conversation around, you know, feminine energy, masculine energy in terms of how we lead. And it also carries over into our business, how our leadership role. And when you was working in corporate America, did you find yourself having to lean more into your masculinity to lead? Because, you know, a lot of times if we move more into our feminine side, then people look at it as a form of weakness, right? So we try to come out more as strong and more in a masculine leadership role. Can you kind of touch on what your leadership style was, and has that kind of like poured over into your business now in terms of how you lead other organizations?
Yeah, I love this discussion. First of all, I feel like we could talk about this a lot because there's so many things that go into it. Yeah. And it's complicated, you know. For me, I worked at an organization that was very sales driven and high energy. So I don't know if I would put these things in a masculine bucket, but there was a lot of pressure to show up with a lot of energy, and maybe that like intensity that you're talking about, that kind of like masculine, strong leader.
Yep.
But for me, for years, I would try to say, oh, I've got to lean into this weakness of mine and be more energetic, more loud. Like, I just felt a lot of pressure to like put myself out there. And that was exhausting. Like, I had a big 100%. Light bulb moment where I just said, you know, I'm just going to show up as myself. I know I do good work. I work really hard. And if I can't figure it out, I'm going to keep showing up. And if I can't show up as me, then it's just not going to work. So, you know, I got some great advice from some leaders who said, hey, you don't need to show up and throw this big hoopla party with the team to be a good leader. What if you throw them like we had a big team celebration, and I'm like, hey, I'm just not one to like bust in and celebrate and cheer and be loud. And one of my leaders said, well, then what would you do to celebrate? I said, well, I would go buy everybody fancy coffee mugs and have a big coffee bar and give them 30 minutes to celebrate each other and then let them go back to work. She's like, well, then do that. Half of this office would probably love that. Yeah. You know, the more introverted, like quieter, introspective people. So we did. We had this big coffee bar. I asked some people on our team who were louder people. I said, will you start like the clapping for this big celebration we're having? Because I can't. And leaned into that. Yeah. I may be off on a rabbit trail, but I think that the point is that I just feel like there's a time and place to work on your weaknesses, but it's better to lean into your strengths and say, what am I good at? How would I do this? And how could I lead out of a place that's genuine, where I'm pushing myself when necessary, but I'm not trying to be somebody else? Yeah. That's definitely important. And, you know, and I ask that question simply because we do have a lot of audience are still women who work full time and are managing their side hustles, their passion projects, and want to take that leap, but still to understand, one, how to get up into leadership, how to move up in your role. Because I always looked at my job as my first investor.
in my business, you know, because I was like, that paycheck invested in what I'm doing now. So I looked at it as my investor. And so the more you can grow your organization, the more you can make, the more you can invest in your business in order to help you get to that leap that you're looking to get to. But I always want to talk about the type of energy we have to lead with in an organization. And for me, it was very much so, it wasn't a male dom. I worked in tech a lot. So it was male dominated. You know, a lot of times I'm the only woman in the room. A lot of times I'm the only African-American woman in the room. And so my leadership style had to be very much so strong, but yeah, I wanted to still bring more of my feminine side where I had understanding for what people were going through, understand how teams dynamic work and, you know, different personalities. And so I think it's always important to have this conversation with women that I come across who were in leadership and now in entrepreneurship in terms of how they led their teams and just advice. You know, is there any advice that you can give other women that are looking to get into leadership in terms of like what role they can take to help them kind of move up in a company as you did?
Yeah. I mean, what comes to my mind is kind of that balance that I was talking about before, where there are going to be times you're going to have to push yourself in a way that maybe is not natural. That's very different than becoming somebody else. So like, for example, learning to communicate with all sorts of different kinds of folks. Like some of the people I had to present to were very like sales driven, big energy, very masculine. They wanted like bullet points. How are we going to win? And I would have to go in and be very prepared for that. Like I need a high level presentation. I need it to move quickly. I need to get to the point. I need to have done my research. But that doesn't mean that I have to morph myself into being them all the time. Like I think you can communicate with different people, and that is a very valuable skill. And then at the end of the day, like I'm still me, and I don't lead that same way. You know, I lead out of a very different presence that's much more probably like relational and personal and like, let's get into it. And, you know, let me meet you where you're at.
Yeah.
And so I think learning to be able to do both is really key.
Yeah. Like I like you said, to also lean into your strengths, not really changing who you are, but just lean into what your strengths are. I think that's important. You know, I heard a saying before that if you master sales, you master life. And being from a sales background, how important is it to understand sales, to be able to master sales as an entrepreneur?
So I think it's key if you're going to be in entrepreneurship that early on you're going to be the one selling yourself.
Yeah.
Frankly, and I don't know where you are on this spectrum, but I'm still a little uncomfortable with sales. Like putting myself out there, promoting myself. It's easier actually for me. I could stand here and tell you why you should call my husband to do work with his business, but like to promote my own self is a big growth piece for me. Yeah. I think that the reality is it's going to be a while in business before you bring on somebody to take that over. And you as the founder, knowing your business and your offerings well enough to be able to sell them just out of a really genuine place of like, I know what I offer. And if I don't, I'm going to find friends to remind me or help me make a list that I keep in front of me for the days I don't feel good about it. And just that you're there to help other people using the gifts that you have and your experiences feels to me so much less salesy maybe than it is just like, hey, I'm here to help and I need to put that out there or it's never going to get there. So that's been my way of approaching it, is probably a little less salesy, and that may be a slower way to grow than somebody who's really salesy, but it has felt more genuine to me.
Yeah, I like the personal approach, because for me too, you know, even with the podcast, it's like, I have to sell this to like advertisers, to like guests. It's like you do have to sell. And I'm not naturally a salesperson. Like I'm a person that's very much so into, because I work in product development, so I'm really much into details of things. You know what I mean? The behind the scenes, how to produce, how to get things done. So you see what you see on the front end, right? In terms of like content that's created, all the stuff that happens on the back end, because I'm used to working the back end versus the front end. Right. And so sales was never a really big thing for me. And so I'm getting very comfortable with it. And that's why I like to ask that question, you know, when I have guests on the show with their sales style, and everyone said the same thing you said, is coming from a very much so a very more human approach, where it's not salesy. I'm really just being myself, and I'm taking an approach of like, this is something that I'm helping. You know, I'm not trying to take from you. I'm helping you maybe expand your business and lean more into that. So that's why I like to ask that question, because one, I'm always learning myself. I really am, because I have to get better at sales, because I know sales is so important, because like you said, at this point, before anyone else comes on, before you can actually scale and grow and have teams, it is just you. And does it take a certain type of confidence that you have to build up in order to even pitch to people? Do you say that your confidence maybe grown since you became entrepreneur because you feel like, okay, now I'm uncomfortable with it, but my confidence is still getting better because I'm selling and I'm actually making the sales, so people are actually signing on?
Totally. The more you do it, the easier it does get. And I still feel like I'm growing in that. A big shift for me is I was at my last organization for 9 years. So my work was what proved myself. I no longer had to come in and like sell myself. I was doing the work. I was in the rooms. I was, presenting to people. And of course you have to keep doing great work, but I didn't have to do the work to go back and look at what I'd done and then put it on a piece of paper and tell you why I should do it for you.
Yes, exactly.
And that's key. I mean, it's been really growing for me to do that, to go back and say, well, I know I accomplished a lot there. I know that I am committed to doing good work. I need to do the exercise to say, what was it that I did? Why was it successful? And how can it help other now small business owners? And I think the more that you do that, and the more that I've, tweaked what I'm offering and had feedback from, CEOs, business owners I've worked with, the easier it is for me to say, okay, here's what I can do for you. Or I'm a fit for you. I'm not a fit for you. I've had those learnings as well. And that experience really does help.
Yeah. So let me ask you this too. When do you think it's a good time to bring on a COO? When it's a good time, what part of the business do you believe that a founder entrepreneur have to be at in order for someone like you to come in and help them kind of expand on their vision?
I love this question. There's kind of two pieces to this. So one of the things that I do for people is strategy sessions, where we would get in and say, define your goals. And if you already have them, create a strategy for the year that your team can do. I love doing those with even solopreneurs, because I just feel like business is lonely, and having that business-minded person get into it with you is so helpful. I would say, as far as bringing a COO on, I have found that it's not always the case, but usually you've got at least a couple of team members or contractors and probably about $1 million a year in revenue. Like I said, that's fluid. I've had clients who have less. And that the big thing for me is that you need at least 10 hours a week of that strategic, like expert level help to bring in a fractional person. Obviously, you'd have to be bigger than that to afford a full-time COO, but to bring in that fractional person, less than 10 hours a week is very hard to get traction in somebody's business. So there's kind of those two phases to it. For the smaller companies, I think it's sessions. And I still think that's important. Like, find somebody who can do your strategic session or be your business coach when you're small. And then as they can be that person who's your sounding board. Then as you grow, you bring somebody in, maybe it's 10 hours a week, to literally take things off your plate and do them for you. As you grow again, they may become full-time or have their own team. So I see it as kind of a staircase.
Do you ever get clients that say, you know what, Kristin, I think I want to just hire you to come on in here and help us with this full time? And you have to say, no, I'm only doing this as a business. I don't want to be hired full time, but I can still be that person for you. Do you get offers at times?
So I have, yes. And I'll say this, I actually think for some people that is a great way to meet your full-time staff, is to start with a contractor who's fractional. And if it's a win-win for you both, I actually have a good friend who did that, started as their remote marketing person. It worked out, went full-time. She still has some stuff on the side. I think it really depends on what you want. I have known, at least for this season, I don't want to be full-time. I really love doing my own thing. And I've kind of just said, I really want to give it a go. And so if you need somebody full-time, I will help find that person for you. That's one of the services I offer. But it's not going to be me right now. Now, I'm never going to say never, because saying never is how I've, my husband and I said we'd never end up in Nashville, and we were there for 10 years. So I just don't say never anymore. But right now, I don't want to be full-time. But for some people, that's what they want. They want to be your fractional COO and grow into a full-time role. And that works out kind of like a testing, like dating phase, before you're full-time with them.
Yeah. Do you envision you guys, like this is just it? You guys going to live this kind of lifestyle for the duration? Or like you said, when your son starts school, we'll probably get more settled in and just travel like this during summers and breaks?
Yeah, that second one is our goal. We've been
Yeah.
bitten by the bug. It's very bittersweet for it to be wrapping up. We're going to head back to the States in May of this year and quote unquote settle down. Our goal is to buy a house, but that we could rent it out in the summers and continue hitting the places on our list. We love it. And I'm ready for my own bed back. So I feel like I'm kind of both. Like, I know we will miss doing it full time, but I think we're a little ready for some consistency.
Yeah, I think you guys live an absolutely amazing life to be able to travel and see different places and be able to experience that, which as a family, those are the kind of memories you just never can get back. You know, those are the kind of things that live with you forever and the kind of thing that your son will always remember too. So, I mean, this has been a good episode, but before we wrap up the episode, I want to know, what advice would you give any entrepreneur who is trying to start a business or maybe even go into a business similar to yours? What advice would you give them?
I think the biggest thing, and even when you were saying, you know, what we're doing is great, it is, I think creating your life is possible, and it's not possible overnight. And I just think that kind of like vision for where you'd like to go and then taking the steps and iterating until you get there, like, is so key. And so if you've got something that you just can't get over, it has been in you, like our travel or starting a business for me, like I say, go for it. And also, it's not going to happen overnight. You know, it took 6 years for us to get on the road, and that's okay. Like, sometimes, you were saying earlier, sometimes, you know, your life doesn't allow you to do it today. You're a single parent, you went through a divorce, you're sick, you're this. Yeah. But I do think it's possible in the future to create a life that's more aligned to what you want if you work towards it.
Yeah, I like that. Creating a life of what you want. I think that's absolutely amazing. What do you see next for your business? Where do you see yourself going?
So there's a few things I'm really excited about. I love, like I mentioned, doing strategy sessions with small business owners and solopreneurs. That's something I've started doing more even this year in 2024, and I'm excited about. But the other big thing that I really love is helping other operations professionals do what I do and matching them with their business that needs what they do. So I love that intersection of, like, my whole role is finding business owners who need an ops person, matching them with this crew of operations people I have on my list, and getting to talk to both sides of that, you know, is so fun for me. I was just talking last week to a woman who's planning on, you know, making the leap into full-time freelancing or contractor roles. And it's so fun for me to help other people do what we've done. We've loved the flexibility, even the crazy roller coaster up and downs, and just being able to help more people do that is exciting to me.
Yeah, being able to have that flexibility is just amazing. It really is. And being able to value what you do and understand what you do, and that your creativity is worth the hustle, basically. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
totally.
Kristin,
well, you're living that out yourself.
Yeah, listen, and I'm hustling every day.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Oh my God. Kristin, this has been a good conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We've learned so much about you and your way of living, the life you created for yourself and your business as well. So I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really my pleasure.
Yeah. All right, guys, listen, this is the Girl Take No Podcast. I am Shaunie Sanders, and I will talk to you next time.